It's time now for the Glendale Devotional Podcast, presented by Glendale Baptist Church of Glen, Mississippi. Listen each weekday at this time for these 10-minute devotions. Now, here is the pastor of Glendale Baptist Church, John Haynes.
Matthew chapter 24 contains the longest teaching that Jesus ever gave. It was the final week of his life before his arrest, crucifixion, and resurrection. As he sat in authority upon the Mount of Olives, he answered the three questions that the disciples posed to him. When will be these things, the destruction of the Jerusalem temple? What will be the sign of your coming? And what will be the sign of the end of the age? We began looking at the final two questions on Tuesday. Jesus answered the end of the age first, and then he answered the second question about the sign of his coming, the rapture of the church. We're currently in Matthew chapter 24, beginning with verse 15. Now, I want you to remember that in this passage, Jesus talks about the end of the age. That is, the events that he lists are part of the Great Tribulation, a 7-year period that immediately follows the rapture of the church. The rapture could occur at any moment. I once heard Matthew chapter 24 described like a camera lens. For some snapshots, you might zoom in to get a tighter shot when you're taking photos. I believe this is what Christ did, beginning with verse 9 and continuing through our passage today. Later, the Lord widens the lens of the camera to give insight about the signs of his return for the church, which again will precede the Great Tribulation. But right now, our passage deals with a future time during the Great Tribulation. Let's listen to the passage. Just to let you know, this is a lengthy passage as we go through verse 35. Again, the breakdown as far as the timeline of this chapter has been discussed for many, many years. However, it is the belief of this Baptist preacher that beginning with verse 15 and continuing to at least verse 35, Jesus is speaking of the Great Tribulation.
Therefore, when you see the abomination of desolation spoken of by Daniel the prophet standing in the holy place, whoever reads, let him understand. Then let those who are in Judea flee to the mountains. Let him who is on the housetop not go down to take anything out of his house. And let him who is in the field not go back to get his clothes. But woe to those who are pregnant, and to those who are nursing babies in those days. And pray that your flight may not be in winter or on the Sabbath. For then there will be great tribulation, such as has not been since the beginning of the world until this time, no, nor ever shall be. And unless those days were shortened, no flesh would be saved. But for the elect's sake, those days will be shortened. Then, if anyone says to you, Look, here is the Christ, or there, do not believe it. For false Christs and false prophets will rise and show great signs and wonders to deceive, if possible, even the elect. See, I have told you beforehand. Therefore, if they say to you, Look, he is in the desert, do not go out, or, Look, he is in the inner rooms, do not believe it. For as the lightning comes from the east and flashes to the west, so also will the coming of the Son of Man be. For wherever the carcass is, there the eagles will be gathered together. Immediately after the tribulation of those days, the sun will be darkened, and the moon will not give its light. The stars will fall from heaven, and the powers of the heavens will be shaken. Then the sign of the Son of Man will appear in heaven, and then all the tribes of the earth will mourn, and they will see the Son of Man coming on the clouds of heaven with power and great glory. And he will send his angels with a great sound of a trumpet, and they will gather together his elect from the four winds, from one end of heaven to the other. Now learn this parable from the fig tree. When its branch has already become tender and puts forth leaves, you know that summer is near. So you also, when you see all these things, know that it is near, at the doors. Assuredly I say to you, this generation will by no means pass away, till all these things take place. Heaven and earth will pass away, but my words will by no means pass away.
In our passage, there are some terms and phrases that might be confusing. First, the abomination of desolation spoken of by Daniel the prophet refers to the prophecy that Daniel gave in chapter 12, verse 1 of the book that bears his name, the book of Daniel. So the Antichrist, the man of sin, who will seem to be the most wonderful world leader, will allow Jerusalem to rebuild the temple. Halfway into the Great Tribulation, the Antichrist, fueled by Satan, rejects this treaty with Israel, and he will stand within the temple and proclaim himself as God. Jesus then tells of how his people should then leave Jerusalem and how difficult it will be for those with physical or religious issues. Now, on tomorrow's program, we'll look at the final question that Jesus answered, the signs of his coming for the church in the rapture. But we can see that the Great Tribulation will be the most horrible time in the history of mankind. Now, that's a big statement. Even as I record this edition of the Glendale Devotional Podcast, it's a very sad day for a lot of people. So whenever we think of the Great Tribulation being the most horrible time in the history of man, we understand the magnitude of those words. Remember some of the worst times in the history of our world? September the 11th, 2001. That was a terrible day. The Great Tribulation will be worse than that. The bombing of Pearl Harbor, the Holocaust, all of the wars of mankind put together, the bubonic plague, COVID, the Great Depression, or any other great tragedies will not be able to match the darkness and the chaos of the Great Tribulation. If there was a way that I could convince you to accept Jesus, I certainly would do it. But my responsibility is to tell you that now is the time to be saved. But I can't make you trust Jesus. You must choose whether to say yes to him or to reject him.
Softly and tenderly Jesus is calling, calling for you and for me. See on the portals, he's waiting and watching, watching for you and for me. Oh, for the wonderful love he has promised for you and for me. And though we have sinned, he has mercy and pardon, pardon for you and for me. Come home, come home, ye who are weary, come home. Earnestly, tenderly, Jesus is calling, calling, oh sinner, come home.
But I've just got to believe that someone might be listening right now, and you've been thinking a lot about your eternal home. I want to tell you that Jesus is near. Trust him right now. Call out to him. Say what you mean, and mean what you say. The scripture says that whosoever shall call upon the name of the Lord shall be saved. You need to talk to him today. Thanks so much for listening to the Glendale Devotional Podcast today. I want you to know something. You are special. You are important. I hope you'll join us tomorrow as we close out the work week right here on the Glendale Devotional Podcast. The Glendale Devotional Podcast is made possible by Glendale Baptist Church. To learn more about Glendale Baptist Church, please contact us. Our website is gbcglen.com, and our mailing address is P.O. Box 70, Glen, Mississippi 38846.